Amid the uncertainties in Europe and globally, Indonesia's stock market, or the capital market as whole, recorded a positive performance in 2023, becoming among the best in ASEAN and in ASEAN in general. We should be grateful with such achievement, as most major markets in the world, especially in Europe, had just experienced a brutal year, partially due to high interest rates and the Russian and Ukraine war.
Indonesian capital market wrapped up in 2022 on a high note, doing much better than other markets such as Europe and other ASEAN economies. Indonesia's Jakarta Composite Index was among the best performing major Asia-Pacific index for the year. The Jakarta Composite Index, the main price benchmark of the Indonesian Stock Exchange, rose 4% in 2022. Compared to the previous year, amid the sharp fall in the price indices of most stock markets in the world. However, factors including Federal Reserve interest rate tightening, the Russia-Ukraine war, and recession fears still haunt the stock market in the world in 2023. Most stock market forecasts for 2023 see moderate improvement. The economic and market landscape in 2023 may be better than the previous year, although recession fears and geopolitical conflicts will continue to cast shadow on the market outlook. The Indonesian stock market is no exception. Share prices remained under pressure amid rising concerns over the global uncertainties during the first 10 days of 2023. The JCI, which started the year at 6,888, continued declining and losing 4% to 6,584 to January 12th. The upward trend began in the following day and continued until Friday, January 20th to 6,868. It looks clear that the Indonesian stock market is struggling to make headway despite the country's healthy economic condition. The Indonesian currency rupiah performed almost the same like the share prices. The rupiah was also under pressure during the first 10 days of the year. The currency weakened from 15,000 per US dollars on the first trading day of the year to a range between 15,250 and 15,500 per US dollars during the 10-day period. The currency then gained ground and strengthened to the level of 15,000 on January 20th. The movement of the share prices and the Indonesian currency did not reflect the economic fundamentals, which are relatively good. The Indonesian economy remains resilient with a promising outlook. The country's economic growth in the fourth quarter of 2022 slowed to 4.8% on a yearly basis, but it was still far higher than the growth of most countries in the world. Bank Indonesia projects solid national economic growth in the 4.5 to 5.3% range in 2023, before accelerating to 4.7 to 5.5% in 2024, underpinned by private consumption or household spending, investment, and exports. Total exports during January to December 2023 rose by 26% to $29 billion from the same period last year. Of the total, non-oil gas export rose by 25.8% to $276 billion. Although there is a decline in commodity prices, the government expects total export will increase by 12%. Other important economic indicators such as household spending and investment are also expected to grow further this year. The headline annual inflation rate picked up to 5.51% in December, compared with 5.42% in November. But the central bank estimates the inflation will return to the range of between 3% and 4% in 2023, and to the range of 2.5% and 3.5% in 2024. United States Central Bank's policy direction remains a market concern and can cause volatility in the short term. However, easing of inflation in major countries and an indication the Fed's less aggressive interest rate policy will bring a fresh hope that the Indonesian stock market and rupiah will perform better this year.
And to discuss more on Indonesian stock markets, we are joined by WILLINOY SITORUS, Head of Research, TRIMEGAH Securities. Thank you very much for coming to the show.
Yeah, thank you very much also for inviting me to the show, Ms. Aline.
Yes. So last year we performed pretty resilient, our stock market. So how do you think about this year? Will we be able to repeat this again in 2023?
Well, first of all, I think the overall markets were kind of bad in 2022, if you're talking about global markets, especially China. Indonesia, on a relative basis in 2022, was quite okay. But I think in 2023, of course, upon China reopening, we may see some headwinds, especially for Indonesia. So if you notice year to date, the foreign outflow around 4 trillion rupiah has been quite massive. But what I think what is more important, Indonesia's fundamental in terms of economy, and if I look at the balance sheet of the corporates, it's also quite healthy, right? So I think it's just a matter of time, especially when the US rates has showing some signs of peaking. That's when the time I think Indonesia will be monitored by the foreign investors. Yeah, but I think now it is quite noticeable that the foreign investors are chasing the China markets. Yeah, given that the markets has quite underperformed in 2022.
So do you think how attractive Indonesian market now that we have seen some foreign capital outflows from Indonesian equity market?
Yeah, I think on a tactical perspective, I think of course Indonesia may face some jittery, yeah, but I think if you look at the rupiah, it has been quite stable, right? So many investors thought that Indonesia's inflation cycle was creeping up. But in fact, if you look at the core inflation compared to the Bay rate, it shows that the interest rate cycle has already peaked for Indonesia. The rupiah now has strengthened. That's positive as well. So of course, this will have a trickle effect to the equity market. That's why you see that the foreign outflow has kind of eased out over the past several days, and we hope that GCI will be relatively conducive going forward. But of course, we have to note several. We still have to be cautiously optimistic for GCI in the short term, of course.
Cautiously optimistic.
Yes.
So yes, this is highlighted from me. And then we will look at the statement from the Central Bank Governor of Indonesia, Mr. Periwarjo. He is pretty confident, and some of us think that he is signaling that this is the last rate hikes for Indonesia. Meanwhile, in the US, the Fed, we expect maybe 1 or 2 more rate hikes. So how do you think about this possibility?
Yeah, I think this is, like I said, I think this is one of the reasons why the rupiah strengthened, why the bond market, has improved, especially over the past several days. So it's different compared to the US, right? If you look at in the US, of course, the core inflation is actually higher than the Fed rate. That is different compared to Indonesia. If you look at the core CPI or core inflation, it's around 3.3%, where if you look at the BI 7 days reverse repo rate is around 5.75%. The US, of course, they have increased the rates quite significantly. If I'm not mistaken, last year's was around 425 bips. This year, maybe around several more hikes. Perhaps we will see in the next several months. But I think if you look at the inflation data globally and especially in Asia, the inflation data over the past several months has slowly eased. Yeah. This is the following the lowering, the reduction in oil prices. If you see in first half last year, oil prices spiked up to the peak was $120, and then it gradually reduced, even though we see some signaling of increase. If the oil price is tamed at a comfortable level, let's say around 70 to 80 or perhaps $90, I think that should be positive for the global markets, especially in Indonesia as well. Yeah.
Okay, so for this year, what sectors we can look at?
Yeah, of course. I think in the short term, especially first half, um, sectors that are quite attractive is the base metal related sector. But if you look at more on a one-year view, I think consumer sector is quite interesting. Yeah, I think if you look at the consumer sector, um, I think should be one of the support for GDP growth for this year because we cannot always rely on trade balance, right? Knowing the volatility in the commodity prices, right? And second, um, if a political year happens during a commodity boom, yeah, I believe that social assistance spending um, will be quite large, right? And that will have a trickle effect to consumption, basic necessity consumption such as uh, data packages, basic foods, transportations, logistics, and so forth. Yeah. So um, consumer sector used to be a darling of the market if you say like 10 years ago, but I think back in 2015 onwards, the consumer valuations has derated. Yeah. So I think now if you look at the consumer, most of them are actually trading at historical discount. So I think this is the time where we can look at the consumer more. But I think this will be more apparent starting in the middle of 2023.
Okay. So in terms of investment strategy for retail investor, what would you suggest to them?
Yeah, I think now it's in the near term is more on trading type of momentum because we cannot predict what's happening in the global markets, right? Even though the fundamentals is relatively sound for Indonesia. But if you want to invest in the long term, I think looking at solid companies with strong fundamentals and has a DNA of basic consumptions or something that has to do with the consumptive side, I think they should be taken a look at. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And we look at other asset class. What do you think about bond markets?
Yeah, bond market, I think it's still attractive for Indonesia. I think in the short term, if you look at the corporate bonds, that was more on the attractive side. But if you look at now, the rupiah has been relatively stable, right? If we have strong and good fiscal, if we have good current account, I think that should be very conducive for the bond market. Yeah, as long as I see the government and the central banks, if they can operate, they can make solid regulations, prudent regulations, independent as well, like central bank. That should be very positive for the bond investors as well. Yeah.
Yeah, regarding rupiah, that this last week we have seen rupiah strengthening against US dollar. Do you think that this trend will be sustainable in the future? And for the full year, maybe you have forecast about the rupiah trading range.
Yeah, I think rupiah, when it shoot up to 15,500, I think that was overshoot period. I think if you look at the current rupiah now, around 15,000, well, let's say hovering around 14,800 to 15,000, that's more of the fair value of rupiah. Especially, there are several catalysts that we can see. The central bank has noted that the rates has peaked, so that's positive for rupiah. And second, if you look at the commodity prices, year to date, even though there's some correction, but it's still very high if you compare it to the 2017 to 2019 average. I can say it's more than 50% increase on a year-to-date basis if you compare it to the pre-COVID cycle. And third, also, there's a called devisa hasil export. So it means there's capital control for companies that export. So they have to park their money in Indonesia, right? I think before, back in 2019, the regulation was just on particular sectors, but now they're taking a look at it more on that. So that should provide sentiment for rupiah as well. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your perspective on rupiah. And I would like to dig more on the equity sector as well, of course. Let's discuss more about what do you think about the energy shares, because some of the investors are still hopeful And also because you said even though there's some correction in the commodity prices, it's still pretty high. So do you think that there's still upside potential for energy shares, coal producers?
Okay, yeah. When you talk about energy, I mean, Indonesia, it's divided into the coal and oil and gas sector, right?
Yes.
I think the base metals, it's more for stainless steel, for consumption goods, for infrastructure related. For coal, it's really hard to measure. I mean, the thing is, the coal price has shoot up substantially, right, during COVID, and even though it's already had a correction, but it's still significantly higher compared to pre-COVID, right? But the thing is, in coal, it's really hard to measure in terms of the demand side. The supply side is really catching up. We can see the heavy equipment sales is increasing. So for the coal sector, we have to see the coal price stable first. And then after that, I suggest investors look at more coal, not on the potential asset growth, but on the potential dividend plays. Because if you look at the companies and the coverage, the dividends yields, it's very attractive. So rather than buying deposits or bonds, you can also consider buying coal stocks that garners good dividends. But we have to see the coal price stable first. Yeah.
Yes, coal stock as a dividend play.
Yeah.
And then should we switch to base metal? Which company would you recommend?
Okay, for base
That
metal.
do you think is the most attractive right now?
Yeah, I think for base metals, it's more of a one basket. The likes of Antam, Inco, MD, KA, yeah, or ADMR. These companies are relatively liquid. If you see the copper prices, it has been increasing, right, over the past several months. Nickel prices still remain elevated. You look at gold prices. Now, I think it only kept increasing. It's around $1,940 per ounce, if I'm not mistaken. So just buy one basket of the liquid ones. I think that's the key for investors, yeah. Because I think the sentiment is still there. If you look at in the U.S. markets, the number one sector is consumer cyclical, and the second is basic materials. And of course, that should lead to a positive sentiment for Indonesian base metals as well.
Okay. Even though Tesla is investing or not, it's still interesting in your opinion?
Yes, yes.
Okay then.
Yeah.
So for the consumer non-cyclical,
Because
your...
on Tesla,
Yes.
I mean, it's not just Tesla.
Yes.
Everyone is doing EVs, right? So it's bigger than just Tesla. So we have to see this on a wider perspective, yeah.
Yeah, because we are expecting so much that Tesla will invest here. Elon Musk will come and open his factory here, but we haven't seen the realization so far.
Yeah.
So for the consumer non-cyclical, what would you suggest for us to look deeper?
I think you're suggesting on consumer staples, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I like companies such as ICBP, Mayora. I like companies like Roti, even though it's not liquid, the share price.
Yes.
Even I like companies that it's not actually a consumer staple, but it's a financing that supports basic necessities, like BFE Finance.
Okay.
I think the loan growth this year can be very solid. So the balance sheet fundamental governance is also very good as well. So these are the type of companies that we actually look at, and if there's potential earnings growth that is attractive, then I think that is suitable for investors. Why this is important? Because the bond yield in Indonesia is relatively high, right? We can say around 6.9 to 7%. Let's say 7%. Equity risk premium is around 6%. So companies that can book earnings growth at least 14 to 15% with solid governance, with decent liquidity, that is something that investors should take a look at.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then we know that this is last question.
Yeah.
Like early this year, the first 2 weeks, JCI has been lagging if we compare it to its peers, and now we just saw a slight rebound last week. So do you think that is there a possibility again that the market will go below 6,600? That's the critical level.
Well, I think it's very hard to say in the short term. I think the sentiment still is there.
Yes.
I think it can have a further rally. a bit, but it does not rule out possibility that there, of course, may be some healthy correction. But just to note that we do expect our index target for TRIMEGAH research by this year end is 7,700. So that's around 12% upside to current index level. So maybe in the first Q we may see some jitteries, but I think the rally will be more apparent in second Q or mid this year onwards. Yeah.
So we have to be very wise in utilizing our dry powder. Thank you very much for coming to the studio.
Thank you, Ms.
WILLINOY,
Alin.
SITORUS, Head of Research, TRIMEGAH Securities.